Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, and in today's review we're going to be taking a look at the Transformers Dark of the Moon Studio Series Voyager class Sentinel Prime, one of the figures from this wave that really caught my eye when it was first announced, as Sentinel Prime was one of the biggest characters to come out of the Dark of the Moon movie, and is definitely, in my opinion, one of the best villains that we ever got out of the entire 5 Michael Bay films. As always, we'll take a very quick look at the packaging, and then we'll take an incredibly in-depth look at Sentinel Prime himself. Turning our attention to the packaging, we have a splendid piece of artwork of Sentinel Prime taken straight from the Dark of the Moon movie. Studio Series Sentinel Prime. The side of the packaging has an up-close image of Sentinel's head sculpt, with the back of the packaging showcasing the figure in robot mode as well as vehicle mode. He is in fact a licensed Rosenbauer fire truck, 32-step for conversion. We also have a brief bio, and then the other side of the packaging has an even more cool image of Sentinel deploying his sword that we see him use in order to fight against Optimus with. And here we have Voyager class Sentinel Prime fully transformed and in his Rosenbauer fire truck. Now, as stated at the beginning of this review, when Sentinel was first unveiled to be coming out for the Studio Series, I honestly couldn't have been more happier. If you'd watched my recent video on my top 5 most wanted Studio Series figures, Sentinel Prime was definitely up there, so upon getting confirmation that this figure was coming and was on the horizon, I was so excited for him. Sentinel was one of those characters that I grew up with, as the Dark of the Moon movie was the movie that really got me into the Transformers franchise, and I absolutely loved the character of Sentinel Prime, and the fact that he's voiced by Spock just elevates his awesomeness within the movieverse. We can see here that Hasbro have done a fantastic job in recreating the really awesome Rosenbauer fire truck that Sentinel obtained within the Dark of the Moon movie, complete with the Rosenbauer emblem, the 316, as well as another Rosenbauer emblem. We do have the white stripe on either side, as well as this darker grey colour going throughout, with a darker red colour scheme throughout as well, something which the original leader class missed out on. If you will recall, the original leader class figure had more of a purplish tint to the overall colour scheme rather than this red, which is more accurate to the movie. As we take a look at the front section of the vehicle mode, we can see here that they have given us some nice details such as this front area. I do like how this hose section too has also been sculpted and is actually made out of quite a firm plastic, so there's no worrying about this warping. The side view mirrors too have also been made out of a hard plastic, which once again was quite surprising, as I thought perhaps they'd be rather rubbery. We can see details such as the doors. The smoky grey plastic that they've used here for the front windscreen I think is great. It gives enough translucency for you to see within, but not too much so that you can really notice some of the robot mode parts. I do like this hose section as well. This is a separate piece and you do have to peg it on when taking the figure out of the packaging. And just giving you a brief look of how this all looks, we've got some nice sculpted details here, and the hose too is also rather detailed as well. It has got 2 hinge joints, so it hinges up and then hinges down, so you could have it folded up within this mode if you so choose, or you can have this section elongated and resting along the top. Unfortunately, there's no swivel, so you can't swivel this side to side much like you could on the original leader class version, but to be honest with you, that's not necessarily too much of a drawback for me. In terms of sword weapon storage, the swords do actually become part of the vehicle mode, so this is one half of the sword and then this is the other half, and taking a look at the underside, it does clean up incredibly nicely. If I had any criticisms with this figure within fire truck mode, it would be the fact that I cannot for the life of me get this section to stay tabbed in. I've transformed this figure multiple times and it just keeps springing open. You can see that the tab just will not grip it whatsoever, and I do think that that perhaps is a tolerance issue or even a QC issue that was missed on Hasbro's part, but seeing as it is the back of the figure, it doesn't really bother me too much. Getting these panels aligned for vehicle mode can be quite difficult as well, however it is definitely achievable, and I think that the overall look of this truck mode looks absolutely astounding, and he does in fact roll quite smoothly as well. However, they have opted to give us mushroom pegged wheels rather than the pin wheels that I actually prefer. For a Studio Series size comparison, here we have Voyager class Sentinel compared next to Voyager Optimus. Personally, I don't really think that these two characters are in scale. The fire truck should be quite bigger than the Peterbilt semi-truck, although I don't believe it's too far off. Optimus was a ginormous truck within the movie, so just giving you a sense of how big these two Voyagers are. Sentinel is definitely a little bit bigger than Optimus Prime, which he really should be, so Sentinel is definitely a very substantial Voyager, and I think looks quite nice when paired next to Optimus, particularly in vehicle mode. Turning our attention now to the transformation of Sentinel. At first glance, it does appear to be rather complex. However, the steps have a certain elegance to them that makes the transformation almost sort of come across as rather natural. You do work on the lower section of the figure and then work on the top half. So to me, the transformation is in fact split up into 2 sections. To begin with, you're going to want to remove either side of this blade, and we'll just set these off to the side for later on. Now, what I tend to do is come around to this back section and just try my best to pry all of this away from this top section, and then that will then bring down the entire lower leg region, and this is the entire leg assembly for Sentinel. We then want to separate these pieces here and just pull those out to the side. We can then take this foot section and pull this up, and this whole section here will lift up, and you then want to take this and rotate this around so that the wheels are now facing inwards to the thighs rather than outwards. With this now done, we can turn our attention to the back, and you just want to collapse this down. This tab here will peg into this slot, so just straighten out the toes and snap that into place. Lift this whole assembly up and then on a ball joint, and then this tab will plug into this slot, so just peg that into place. And then there you have one whole leg of Sentinel more or less fully transformed, and we'll repeat the exact same process here for this side. So just lift this whole section up, rotate this around, and then collapse this panel in, lift the toe up, tab that into place, fold that back in. Turn our attention around to the side now, just so I can give you this on a different perspective. You want to hinge this up and then pull this section up and tab it in via this slot and peg. So snap that into place. And here we have the entire lower leg region of Sentinel completely transformed. So we can begin work on the top. Turning our attention now to the top of the figure, what you want to do here is come to this underside, and you can see the hands clearly pegged into the cape section. So you just want to pull those apart from one another, and they are in fact tabbed in, so just loosen those tab connections. What we can then do is pry this assembly away from the cape, so lift this up and fold this section out, and then repeat the exact same process here for this side. So lift this section out and fold this down, and we'll just leave the cape compressed like that for now. With that all being said, we can come to this piece here, and you just want to lift this whole section up, which will free the whole front section of the fire truck away from the main body. With this done, we can collapse these side view mirrors on both sides and then collapse this panel within, and we'll leave that for now. We can then lift up the magnificent Sentinel Prime head sculpt. You're going to want to angle this down, and then that will allow you to clear the side doors and peg those into the front of Sentinel's chest. Now what we're going to do is peg this tab into this slot here. So just pull this down and align this up appropriately. It can be rather finicky to do, but it should just go in there rather easily like that. And repeat the same process here for this side. So just bring this one in and tab that into place, and if this comes undone, peg that back into place. Fold out these shoulder pieces on Sentinel and then just pull the arms down. And then what we can do is take the faux side view doors and actually peg those over the top to give us a really nice movie accurate detail. I find it fascinating how the real side doors actually become the chest. However, this faux chest overlaps them. I think that is great engineering. Now what we'll do is elevate this joint and rotate this all the way around so that we are left with something along the lines of this. Now looking in here, we can see these two tabs here and then this bigger tab, and they actually slide into these joints. Now it's not the most solidified connection, however I will talk more through that when we go into robot mode, but you just want to collapse this in and give it a really firm push to try and solidify as much as you possibly can do. Take this butt flap now and just compress it along, well, his butt. We can then lift this section, this will just sit there, and then come to this cape and split the cape and hinge it out to your so desire. And then now what you'll want to do for the finishing touches is just pull out these hip armor pieces. A great attention to detail on Hasbro's part. I think this is fantastic. And with all that being done, here we have the Transformers Studio Series Dark of the Moon Sentinel Prime, fully transformed and in his awesome looking robot mode. Now before we begin taking a look at Sentinel, taking a quick look at the sword, you just want to fold these pieces out like so. You will have to separate these in order to peg it into the palm, however I'll just show you that you do connect them, and that is how the blade is in fact formed. I do believe that this is the side that you're supposed to expose when you have Sentinel wielding this, as on the back of it unfortunately it is the two panels that made up the fire truck mode. However, I think that it's quite a good use of utilizing the accessories within the storage of the vehicle mode. And wow, here we have the Voyager class Studio Series Sentinel Prime, and the figure looks absolutely magnificent. Definitely a lot better than I thought Hasbro could potentially ever pull off after the magnificent release of the Leader class Sentinel Prime way back in 2011. Now that's not to say that this figure surpasses that figure. It does definitely improve it in some aspects where the Leader class originally failed. However, there are some drawbacks that actually the Leader class I personally believe did better. Now of course there is the scale difference of this being a Voyager and the original figure being a Leader class, but I've got to say that as just a Voyager, this figure is truly tremendous. Let's take a look at the details first. Taking a look at my favorite attribute of the figure, here we have the absolutely gorgeous looking head sculpt. This looks magnificent and is by far the best head sculpt we've got for Sentinel Prime. This looks really, really well done, and there is even some resemblance that I believe carries over from Leo Nimoy's actual face. To me, I definitely can see him in here, which is great considering that he did in fact voice this iconic character. I think the paintwork is amazing with the gunmetal silver for the beard and the main faceplate. We've also got details such as the mouth and the different beard. We've got the eyes, which have been painted in a nice allspark blue, as well as these eyebrow sections which point off to the sides. And we can also pick out some nice details of these helmet sections, which is very reminiscent of Optimus Prime's own helmet. If we lift the neck up ever so slightly, we can in fact see some lovely mechanical detailing actually underneath the neck. And that is something that is truly mesmerizing about this figure, is that the level of detail, sculpt work on this is remarkable. If we take a look at the faux chest as well, I love how they've added this asymmetrical detail that is accurate to the movie of this silver section here that protrudes and goes along into the torso. Behind the faux windscreen, we do in fact have that mechanical detail that Sentinel did in fact have within the movie, and that too has been painted in a lovely gunmetal silver, so really does catch your eye when looking at this figure. We've got some different detailings here of different silver sections. They truly have painted this figure beautifully. We can see the red paint is incredibly vibrant, which was something that wasn't so apparent on the original figure. We can also see that the plastic is rather dark, however in hand I think that it does complement the detail rather nicely, and we can see the shoulder pads are very reminiscent of an elderly knight, which I just think is so well done. And as we turn our attention to the arms, we can begin to see some more mechanical details, as well as some nice detailing on these gauntlet sections, and the hands too have also been sculpted really nicely. This main torso area too has got some fantastic detail. We can pick out this black section, which looks super cool, as well as these transparent clear pieces of plastic with some nice red paint apps. And then as we turn our attention down to the legs, I love the extra detail of adding this flare to the hip skirt as well, just for that extra level of movie accuracy. The tubing going down to the angular crutch plate, and then we can see the red paint applications down to the shins. Incredibly elegant design, and the toes too are really elegant as well. As we turn to the sides, there is some nice moulded in plastic. Whilst it is all dark, I think that it does look quite nice. If I had any problems with Sentinel within robot mode, in terms of where all of his vehicle mode stuff stores, I would say that I really am not a fan of how the entire front section of the vehicle mode does just peg onto the butt. With the original leader figure, this whole section did tuck into the main torso, which is something I wish they would have carried over from this particular figure, but I don't think it's too bad. It does still hide very well from the front, and it is compressed via the cape. It's not too noticeable. And talking of the cape, it's very similar to the other Sentinel figures we've got, with the hose folded on the back and the cape spreading off to the side. Just an absolute magnificent looking figure, and quite frankly it's probably one of the most detailed Studio Series that we've ever had from Hasbro. Now turning to the articulation of Sentinel Prime, this is where things get slightly more downsided due to the fact that the articulation isn't as great on this figure as it has been on some of the other Studio Series. Taking a look at the articulation at the head, this is where I really think that Hasbro dropped their game. The head can barely look left to right and is on an incredibly stiff joint. This is due to the limitations of how far the beard sculpts down and the fact that he has got all of this molded detail around the neck. There really isn't much room at all for him looking left to right, and he can barely look up and down. So in terms of head articulation, it's quite standard for a figure from this line. The arms are able to rotate the full 360 degrees, as well as hinge out to the side and rotate 360 just above the elbow. He can bend to a 90 degrees at the elbow, and there is a full 360 rotation at the wrist. Due to the transformation, he does have a waist joint. However, this once again is one of the areas of criticism I have with this figure, is that it really doesn't take much effort at all for this joint to keep coming detached. So definitely in terms of the waist joint and the whole locking mechanism between the upper torso and the lower torso, that is definitely one of my most noticeable complaints regarding this figure. The leg articulation, however, is quite good. The legs can kick forwards that far to a great degree, and as well as back to that far, all of this section can move out of the way, so you can get quite a good kick backwards. He can in fact do the splits, and you can see here that once again the torso has unfortunately detached. We do have a rotation joint just above the knee section with a 90-degree bend at the knee, and unfortunately there is no ankle rocker joint, so you aren't really able to get this figure standing naturally utilizing the feet. They are always slightly off to the side, but due to the fact they are molded ever so slightly angled, you are able to get some poses which look a lot more natural than if they were just to be static. For a size comparison, here we have Sentinel Prime compared next to Optimus Prime, as well as Dark of the Moon leader Megatron. Personally, I think the scale between Sentinel and Optimus works quite nicely, although I do remember Sentinel being more or less eye to eye with Megatron. Now, of course, you can squat Megatron's knees down to a lot more of a significant degree. However, this is natural for Megatron's knees to look like this, so I do think that the scale here is slightly off and that Megatron should have perhaps been slightly smaller or Sentinel slightly bigger. But as stated, I think that the scale between Optimus and Sentinel works quite nicely, so it isn't too much of a drawback. And for another set of size comparisons, here we have Sentinel Prime compared next to leader Shockwave, as well as Voyager class Ironhide. It's fantastic to finally have two of the best characters to come out of the Dark of the Moon movie in the most accurate Studio Series format. So Shockwave and Sentinel look fantastic together, and here of course we've got Sentinel paired next to Ironhide, who he brutally killed within the movie. Now, whilst on the topic of Ironhide, I will talk about accessories. We saw earlier that Sentinel comes with this blade, and that is the only accessory that this figure includes. He doesn't unfortunately include the shield that we see him use within the movie, nor the rust cannon that we see him use to destroy Ironhide with. However, seeing how much paint and detail and the level of complexity to the transformation, personally I think that that was probably due to budgetary constraints, and the sword is the most noticeable weapon that he used in the movie, so personally I'm just glad that he includes that. So that was my review on the Transformers Studio Series Voyager class Sentinel Prime. Personally, as with the majority of these Studio Series figures, this is fantastic. The level of movie accuracy that they've managed to achieve within the robot mode truly is astounding, specifically the head sculpt and this whole faux chest section. I really think that that is a major step up from some of the figures that come out from Dark of the Moon. Where this figure falls slightly short is in terms of the accessories and the overall articulation. I do wish the articulation for Sentinel was slightly improved, specifically within the head and the lower leg region, and the torso too. The locking mechanism I wish was slightly tighter. However, that could just be a QC issue on me, but the positives definitely outweigh the negatives. This is a fantastic version of Sentinel Prime, and whilst it may not necessarily be as good as the leader class figure, it definitely does improve upon certain aspects that that figure wasn't necessarily so strong in. Personally, I'm so glad that Hasbro gave us this rendition of Sentinel for the Studio Series, and that really does conclude the main bad guys from the Dark of the Moon movie, which if you are collecting all of the Studio Series figures, then you're definitely going to want to pick this one up. As stated previously, Sentinel was one of the best characters to come out of the 5 Michael Bay movies. The transformation personally for me is just as complex as the original leader figure, so they haven't dumbed down the transformation whatsoever. It is just some design choices of where specific pieces end up that draw this figure back for me. Most noticeably is where the entire front windshield of the vehicle mode ends up on the back. I do wish they could have found a way to plug it into the torso, much like on the original figure, but taking a look at this figure on its own, I do think that this is a fantastic looking figure, and for a Voyager, I definitely think you get a lot of bang for your buck. I hope that you enjoyed my review, and if you did, please let me know down in the comment section below, and until my next review, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.